These lectures are not designed for use as medical references to diagnose, treat, or prevent medical or mental health illnesses or trauma. If you have questions about the diagnosis, treatment, or prevention of a medical condition or mental illness, you should consult your personal physician or other mental health professional.
According to a large survey by the healthcare provider Cigna, most Americans suffer from loneliness and dissatisfaction with their relationships. Nearly half say they sometimes or always feel alone or left out. 13% of Americans say that 0 people know them well. The survey measures social isolation using the UCLA loneliness scale and shows that loneliness has gotten worse in each successive generation. In the book, Them, Why We Hate Each Other and How to Heal, Senator Ben Sasse argues that loneliness is killing us, citing rates of suicide and overdose deaths in America. This year, 47,000 Americans will commit suicide, and more than 70,000 will die from overdoses. What has happened to our sense of community? Why do so many feel loneliness and despair? Some have argued that what we need is called a thick community. A thick community is a sociological term that refers to a community with deeply shared values, a common story, and a sense of loyalty and commitment to the group, all in the service of a powerful purpose. Or at least that's the traditional model, and one that was much easier to achieve when people weren't so mobile and were more homogeneous. We may also need to feel rooted to a place in a community, but perhaps there are other ways to be thick. Perhaps there's a place beyond tribalism and populism that helps us see we're all part of a larger community that needs to learn how to support one another. People are social animals, and social animals have hierarchies. It's all about power and dominance, about learning your place on the social ladder. Where do you stand, and how does it affect you? What was it that pushed you up or pushed you down? And how does your position affect your ability to connect with others, to counteract this epidemic of loneliness? Meeting new people and forming new relationships is hard for anyone, but imagine what it must be like for a person with heightened shyness or social anxiety, or for a person with a history of interpersonal trauma. And what if they manage to find the courage to reach out and then they get rejected? Brain scans of people who've been rejected by their ex or cruelly excluded from an online game are almost indistinguishable from those of people in physical pain. Apparently, this was adaptive in our evolutionary past. See, if rejection didn't sting, you might have been perfectly comfortable leaving your tribe, which would lower your chance of survival. But it means we're still wired to be overly sensitive to rejection. How often does that one negative comment in a performance evaluation feel crushing? How many of you have given a presentation and immediately honed in on the one frowning face in the audience? So we know it's common and it's hardwired, but shyness pushes us farther out on that social anxiety spectrum. Up to 80% of people report that they were shy at some time in their lives. 40% describe themselves as shy now. However, if you think of yourself as shy, it doesn't mean you have a problem that necessarily requires professional help. As with depression and other forms of anxiety, we can think of social anxiety, and especially anxiety around rejection, as existing on a continuum. Small amounts of it might actually be a good thing. The negative feelings associated with rejection also mean that connection is implicitly valued. But how do you start pulling this complex idea apart? How can you know when social difficulties might be more about you than about the people you're around? And is it really an either or, a me versus them? Let's recall our case of Amanda, a young woman just out of college and as of yet unable to find a job. She had to move back in with her parents and is feeling like she's second fiddle to her more successful brother. She's certainly feeling rejected in the professional realm, and it seems like there are some long-standing family dynamics about her feeling loved and valued in her family, at least as much as she believes her brother to be. But Amanda isn't really socially anxious. She knows she can rely on her family, and she has good college friends that she can call at any time. We can predict that her sensitivity to rejection might be heightened given her low mood, and it might even be driving part of her procrastination around her job search. But let's introduce a new case. Someone that truly struggles with rejection sensitivity and copes with it in ways that may push others away. If you compare and contrast Stephen with Amanda, you'll see some similarities, but also some notable differences. Let's meet Stephen, a 44-year-old single man who describes himself as neurotic and sensitive. He believes he's often rejected by others who either don't like him or just don't understand him. He often turns his hurt feelings into anger and withdraws from others. He copes with his anxiety by being quiet and detached, but then he feels left out and overlooked. So what's going on here? His diagnosis is probably in the realm of social anxiety, but his problems are more about the ingrained, understandable, but unhelpful habits he's developed to cope with his hypersensitivity to rejection. Before we do any more formulation, let's hear a little about what this looks and feels like, both from the inside and the outside. Let's listen.
I think, though, we should talk a little bit about the way social anxiety feels from the inside, but also the way it can look from the outside. Because depending on our defenses, the ways we try to cover up our anxiety, people can interpret it in very different ways. So internally, tell me what that anxiety feels like.
Well, it's a shortness of breath. It's I don't know if it's physically sweating, but it's feeling that my body temperature rising. Mm. It's so many things swirl through my head that I become mute. So what should I say? What if I say the wrong thing? Well, I do want to say this. If I'm talking to a person or if I'm walking into a room, with several people in it, and maybe a couple I do know, maybe I don't. It feels like my body slows down. Yeah. It's a little bit of fight or flight kind of, yeah. That feeling welling up, and it just becomes paralyzing. So then I can't continue on. I don't run out of the room, but mentally that's what I'm doing. I'm running out of the room.
Yeah. And let's talk then a little bit about, and it's hard to know what other people see because we're not looking at the world through their eyes, but if we were to try to step outside of you and imagine what other people see when you're feeling anxious, can they tell that you're in fight or flight mode, or does it look like something different?
Sometimes I think to them it just looks like aloof, that I'm not speaking and I'm not really answering their questions because things are swirling around the head. Even a simple question like, how you doing, or, what'd you do last weekend? So yeah. I think they might just think I'm aloof and I don't want to open up. I don't want to share anything. Where the opposite is true. It's just that I can't. So I don't think that they see the anxiety. I think they just see someone who just doesn't feel like talking. Not a person who's angry. Just a person who he just doesn't want to talk.
Right. And they don't realize your anxiety has locked you inside yourself, yes. And you can't reach out to them for help. They don't know you need help.
Yeah, and well, ironically, yes, I'm not even comfortable enough to tell them, hey, I'm just feeling a little anxious now, so, give me a minute or two. But yeah, I'm just not able to communicate those things.
Okay. So two things we want to do. We want to help you manage that internal sensation of anxiety. Mm-hmm. But we'll also need to think about strategies to help other people understand you. And it's not to evoke sympathy or to have other people become responsible for managing your anxiety. Yeah. But if they understand who you are, it's probably easier for them to connect with you and vice versa.
That sounds difficult. Because that sounds like I'd have to be opening up to them.
Right. It makes you vulnerable to do that.
Yes, exactly, and that's sort of part of my problem, I think.
So we'll want to pick the right time, and we'll want to pick the right people. And some people, and if it's a work setting, some people you probably never want to open up to, and maybe shouldn't. Sure. But others, maybe you should. Okay. Okay. So what we'll do is we will sort of create these parallel lists of strategies, one for you to better regulate and manage that internal sense of anxiety, and the other is how to help others more accurately perceive who you are and what they can do to help or at least to connect with you.
Wow. Okay.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, let's get started.
Okay.
Here, I'd like you to go back and think about habits of mind. Which ones do you see him using? Given his sensitivities, we'll want to make sure he doesn't feel blamed, so I'll do a lot of normalizing. After all, we all take thinking shortcuts. We will, of course, want to think about behavioral responses to anxiety that sustain or maybe even exacerbate it. He does a lot of avoidance, particularly of social situations. Let's listen to a few examples of how this works.
I'm wondering if you can call to mind, and you've shared a few already, or maybe you could just pick one of those recent incidences when you felt socially rejected by, say, coworkers.
Yeah, well, a better one, I think, outside of work is, so I play, pickup basketball sometimes, and so there's a group of us that we kind of show up pretty often, and we're Facebook friends with some of them, and a couple of times specifically last week, there's a Facebook post, hey, we're all out, we all went to a movie together, and now we're having something to eat together. And it was like 4 or 5 of the guys that, we're always kind of together, this once a week kind of pick up basketball. Why wasn't I a part of that? Why wasn't I? It wasn't a formal thing. It wasn't a specific person's, specific party. It just was, they decided to get together. And where was my phone call? Where was my, hey?
You weren't included.
Yeah, and
okay.
That hurt.
How often do you think that happens, or how often do you notice things like that?
A couple times a month, I see where people are doing things, and I'm just not a part of the circle, whether it's that group or the group of friends at work or people at work that I consider my coworkers, my friends, and they're off, they're doing things. Sometimes it's with their significant others, but it's not anything that I should be excluded from. So it's a couple of times a month, and it kind of feeds on reasons why I think that I don't reach out to them, because I feel like, well, they probably don't want to hang out with me. That's why they're doing these things.
Okay.
So here you see a great opportunity to break out some of our CBT skills. We can use a thought record to bring down the anxiety and the sting of rejection, but we also need behavioral strategies. We tackled habits of mind first. Let's listen.
Well, I know we've talked about cognitions and cognitive therapy a little bit, but I think these examples are good for us to work through maybe some thought records at some point. And we had talked about habits of mind. So, we're not computers. We can't pay attention to everything and be perfectly rational all the time. In fact, a lot of the time we aren't. We do all sorts of thinking shortcuts. And based on our earlier lives, we're taught to look at things in a certain way, in a positive light, in a negative light, in a very detailed light, or in a sort of general kind of way. And when I hear someone talking about experiences that you've had, first I feel sad, and I feel empathy and know how painful it can be to feel isolated or rejected, if not all the time, most of the time. Mm-hmm. But I wonder too if, because of those experiences, you've been taught to look for rejection. We would call it, the habit of mind is selective attention, where you selectively scan for those things that might be happening. We have a confirmation bias, where we have a set of beliefs, people are going to be this way towards me, and whenever that happens, you go, yep, and it's hard to see disconfirming evidence. Yeah. Other habits of mind that I think we should probably look at is personalization. So sometimes things happen and they are unpleasant, but they aren't about us. Sometimes they are.
Right.
But it's good to take a step back and go, is this personal? Is it not personal? And we want to think about scoping. So how big or how small do we make something? So magnification, are we making a small event into something that is much bigger? I feel like a massive rejection has occurred. Or are we taking something big, works in both ways, and making it really small as a way of sort of denying or pretending that the problem's not there? So I think part of what we want to do is we want to use those events as triggers in a thought record. We want to capture the emotions and the intensity and then start writing down those thoughts. And then we'll think about habits of mind. You know, is this selective attention? Is it magnification? Is it personalization? Is it something else, you know, that's going on? Is there a different way to just as accurately think about these situations that leaves you feeling less rejected or maybe just in a better mood in general? Does that sound like something that might be useful to do?
Definitely.
Okay. Well, why don't we do that? Let me take out a thought record. We'll start with the left-hand column, look at the triggering situation, and we'll start working through some of those habits of mind.
Okay.
What did we just see, and what would come next? Well, we want him to practice thought records, starting with the first 3 columns, then doing the harder part of rewriting a more balanced thought. We want him to do this enough so that he internalizes these new beliefs and can dispute thoughts on the fly. This next clip takes place several weeks later when he's feeling comfortable with thought records and he's ready to test his on-the-fly internalized skills. Let's watch.
So Stephen, you've been doing such a good job with the thought records and pushing back against those habits of mind. I thought we would take it up to the next level, where instead of having those, you know, conversations on a piece of paper, we could actually role play some of those conversations.
Okay.
And what we would do, I'll ask you to describe a recent example of a social rejection at work, if you want, and I will play those critical thoughts or those habits of mind that we've been going through on the thought records, and you will be the other voice, right? You'll be the voice that pushes back, the voice that goes for a more helpful, balanced interpretation of the situation. It'll feel funny because it's not really real. I mean, you're having a conversation with yourself, but I'm outside of you. But what we want to do is take it off a piece of paper, off the thought record, put it into a role play, and eventually where it will go is inside your head. So the next time this is live and you're in a situation where this potential rejection is happening, you can, inside your mind, in the moment, say, whoop, hold up, let's take a step back and let's look at this. Maybe I can push pause and think about it later, or maybe I can think about this in a different way in the moment. But the more we practice it and the more we help you prepare, the easier it will be when you go back to work.
Okay.
The stage is now set. We're ready to go. Let's see what happened.
So let's do the role play then, and I will play that sort of internal critical voice that's feeling rejected and hurt, but also angry. Mm-hmm. And if you want, you can be my voice or whomever's voice that's sort of pushing back and helping to find a more helpful way forward in interpreting the situation.
Okay.
And I will say, you know, whenever we do this, you have full artistic license to be whatever. Just remember the lessons, you know, that we've used,
right.
And forgive me if I embellish a little too much,
sure.
you know, in the wrong
sure.
direction or whatever. It's just to give you practice to sort of quickly think of a response on the fly to some thoughts that have popped up.
Okay.
Okay.
Sure.
So let's say that you've just had you just ask him, hey, are you guys doing anything after work? And he said, no, I don't have any plans, not doing anything. So let's start at that point. And now I'm the voice inside your head.
Okay.
Man, he is lying. I know they're going out after work. Why wouldn't he tell me about it?
So are you sure that there is something going on? How are you sure that there is something going on? Maybe he honestly didn't know about these plans that you had heard about.
Well, I did hear about it, and they usually do go out. So, I mean, he could have said, well, I'm not sure, I'll check for you and I'll get back to you. Couldn't he have said that? He could have said that, right? If he really wanted me to be there, then he should have stepped it up, you know, and exerted a little bit of effort.
Perhaps if he wasn't aware that there was something going on, maybe they just hadn't gotten around to inviting him, or maybe he wasn't even part of this group. Maybe it was just an innocent, he thought that was just an innocent question, just a general question, not a pointed, you know, there is something going on after work. Are you a part of it?
But if he really cared about me as a person, he would have said, I don't have plans, but why don't we make plans together? Why didn't you do that? He could have.
He could have, but there are times when people don't like to leave themselves open like that. So maybe he did have other plans after work, but again, he wasn't rejecting. He was more saying, I really have no plans that I want to share, but it had nothing to do with coworkers. Maybe he had a date, or maybe he had other things that he was going to do, and just didn't feel like he wanted to share with you.
So again, and this is the story of my life, right? Other people are more important than I am. That really stinks.
Well, maybe it wasn't totally about you being rejected. It was more of an innocent, him not being forthcoming for his own purposes. It could have easily been that he wasn't rejecting you.
So why don't we call a timeout and pause there and debrief that a little bit. And I think you did a great job with that. I was hearing that you were pushing back against the personalization, that you are also looking for counter evidence that maybe he's not lying. We don't know what he knows for sure. We're guessing that he knows, and that he's choosing not to tell you about it, and that he's doing it because of you specifically. So there's a lot of I think habits of mind that are emerging, that are pushing you in this hurt, sort of angry direction. And I hear your voice, and it's good to hear it in your voice, saying, well, wait a minute. But let me check with you. As you were saying those things, did you believe them? Did they have any potency, or maybe not quite sure yet?
I started to see a little glimmer as I was saying those things back, but honestly, as you were saying the things back to me in my head, they kept pulling me back to, I think I was still rejected at that point. Some of the things I was saying didn't seem as plausible for him to be those things going through his head. So it's possible, but I still feel the rejection.
Right. And that's a great point. We call them habits of mind, because they really are habits. They are habitual ways in which we interpret situations. And the thing about habits, even if they cause us pain or they make us sick, they feel familiar. And we oftentimes confuse familiarity with truth, or with something being right or accurate. And it's not necessarily. It's familiar, but that just means it's a habit.
I got you.
The piece that we didn't quite get to in the role play, there seems to have been, not just in this situation, but in other situations, you've pushed the responsibility of issuing invitations onto other people. And in that particular interaction, when he said, oh, I don't have any plans, you could have said, well, hey, would you like to do something? What would that be like?
That didn't even occur to me that would be not frightening, but that would raise my stress.
Unfamiliar,
level.
right?
Yes.
It's unfamiliar.
Yes, that's a very good word for it, because that's an immediate rejection, face to face, one on one. Put myself out there like that.
Now, has this guy invited you to things before and you said no? No, I don't remember there being that. No, not a one-on-one. Okay. And have you been invited to work events that you didn't go to?
Oh, yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. So in a way, you rejected those invitations that have come your way. And I think, these social dynamics evolve over time. And oftentimes when people do feel anxious, they want to avoid what makes them anxious, social interactions, for example. But over time, people just stop inviting you because they've been trained that you probably won't go. It's kind of like if, you're calling a friend, they don't return your call. You call them again, they don't return your call. You call them again. Eventually you stop calling. You still care about them and you miss them, but you've been trained essentially that they're not going to call back, so why do it? So we don't want you to be in a situation where you've trained people around you not to invite you, and you've also not taken the initiative yourself to issue invitations. So it will require, trying on some different things, maybe a little bit unfamiliar, but like all of the ideas that we've talked about here, it's an idea, and we test ideas out. And sometimes they work, sometimes they don't. We pick them because we think they'll work, but ultimately you have to try it out and see what happens.
Okay, so what did we see? Stephen is starting to see patterns and have some insight about his behavior. It's not about blame. It's more about understanding the complicated dance of social relationships. The good news about seeing that he plays a role is that he can do something about it. It means he may have to risk rejection by stepping forward and reaching out to others, but it will also send the message that he's interested and available to connect. The real tragedy of folks with Stephen's dynamic is that they really, really want to connect, but they unintentionally send the message that they could really care less. Showing their interest and their vulnerability won't always work, but it will get them closer to where they want to be. Given the ambiguity of most social interactions, especially those with new people, the circumstances are ripe for habits of mind to take over, which make me think of the cognitive side of our toolbox. Now, behavior is important. You have to be doing something social, but it's really how you think about the social interaction both during and afterwards. We all have an internal monologue. What's yours? Researchers have shown there's a phenomenon called the liking gap. Most of us are far too negative in rating how we performed in a social interaction, and most of us believe that new people don't like us as much as they really do. The researchers conclude that people can be their own greatest critic, but what is hard for people to see is that others do not have this same perspective on their faults. The lesson? Remember that self-doubt is the norm. No matter how cool someone might look on the outside, odds are that people like you a lot more than you think. Let me share just a couple of other adaptations of cognitive strategies already in your CBT toolbox: reframing and cognitive restructuring. Then we'll wrap up by sharing some tips for making social situations go more smoothly. Reframing is simply a way to re-explain a situation from a different perspective. The same event happened, but it might be attributed to different, more helpful or more hopeful causes. Most rejections occur due to a lack of fit. Your skills don't match the job requirements. You and the person you were dating just didn't share enough common ground. It's about the chemistry and not about something attributable just to you. Research has shown that looking at the relationship or the fit instead of just the person involved helps assuage the sting of rejection. After all, everyone, and I mean everyone, gets rejected many times in their life. Fortunately, when one door closes, another soon opens. Just don't miss it because you're busy looking at closed doors. Another cognitive restructuring tip has to do with the idea that we have multiple selves. Really just another way of saying that we have lots of layers and lots of attributes, all of which are not always involved in a rejection. It's just part of us that wasn't a good fit. There's more to you than that particular job or that particular relationship. If part of you is feeling bruised, take out a thought record and write about positive attributes you have as part of an alternate thought. Just be fair and balanced, and remember that we all contain multitudes. Recall that difficulty in interpersonal relationships can generally have two root causes: a lack of practical skills and/or anxiety that prevents a person from using the skills they already possess. We've been talking about emotion regulation, managing that anxiety, so let's now share an example of a practical tip of building those skills. The tip is about the behavior of asking questions. It's a habit you can develop and fine-tune to better manage your likability. By looking at impressions following first dates and first social encounters, research has shown that people who ask more questions are better liked. It shows you're interested in the other person, and it gets the other person talking. The more a person shares, the closer they feel to you, assuming you clearly indicate you're listening while they're talking. Come up with a few stock questions that are open-ended and something matched to the context. At a fun social event, it might be something like, "Tell me about an adventure you've had," or "What are you most looking forward to this next week, this next month?" Practice different questions and see which seem like a good match with your personality, and remember that you should try to stretch yourself. It's okay to feel a little bit awkward. Social relationships, especially new ones, are awkward. Even if it feels a little bumpy, others will notice that you're making an effort. It will be appreciated, and the favor may be returned. So be sure you have some answers to your own questions. So in this lecture, we return to anxiety, specifically to social anxiety and rejection. We used our standard CBT skills and added some new knowledge about the nature of rejection, about common maladaptive reactions and something called the liking gap. We demonstrated a fairly high-level role play to test out how well a person has internalized their cognitive restructuring skills. And hopefully, we've reframed shyness. Yes, it feels uncomfortable, but it may actually make you more, not less, appealing to others. Please join us for our next lecture, where we'll talk about early childhood trauma and adverse childhood experiences. Thank you.